without further ado, I would like to call this debate to order on resolved, treat other, resolved, treat other ex-presidents like Trump and they'd all go to jail. And with that, I'd like to call on our first affirmative speaker, who is William Sparks. Mr. Sparks, go ahead and unmute, and you have 4 minutes. Just checking on the muting situation. Maybe there's a tech issue, so maybe we'll actually start.
No, are you?
There you are.
Oh, great.
Now we can hear you.
You can hear me. Can you see me?
We can also see you.
Oh, that's terrific. So I was listening very carefully. Gosh, you had a big to-do list, and I'm sweating bullets here, knowing if I can meet all of them. Let me just say, all I'm going to say starting out is, I'm a new American, and so my perspective is as a first-generation immigrant to this great country. And look, I came here many decades ago, so everything I say, I want everybody on the call. I'm not hiding my perspective. It's as a first-generation immigrant, and I think everybody on the line knows what that means. So I want to say this coming in. Also, I have a deep, deep prejudice. It is not what everybody on the line, on the phones, on the computers expects. It's not in favor of President Trump, which I do. It is this, folks. I have spent my whole life as a defense lawyer, and so I have an abiding distrust of the Department of Justice. I have come up against them. And why do I have that distrust? They are great lawyers. They are doing the people's business. And they are a great institution. So you may say, rhetorically, why does Sparks have a distrust for them? The reason I put to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that they bring with them in all they do, including the effort backed by our investigative agencies at Mar-a-Lago, the tremendous and unrelating weight of the state with them. I have personally come up against them in many instances, and I have awe of that and awareness of it. So when I see what they bring with them, I have both respect and I also am aware of what they bring with them to any investigation and any effort in front of all entities, including the judiciary, which, thank God, is an independent entity. I also would urge you, when you're assessing the question before the House tonight, that is, would all former presidents be in the same position as President Trump? To do something, if you have the time in your valuable day, you don't have to be a lawyer like me. You can go on your computer and Google or Bing or whatever the 20-odd page decision of Judge Cannon, the U.S. District Court judge in the Southern District of Florida, where she granted the order of the plaintiff in this case, that is the president, President Trump, granting him a partial relief in his motion last week. And read her opinion. And why I want you to read it is that Judge Cannon very carefully lays out the reasons that I believe will convince you that the president came up against this behemoth in the Justice Department and that they tread beyond the pale with respect to attorney-client privilege, which we all are entitled to, and potentially executive privilege, which all the presidents get. Now, I am older than probably most everyone on this call, but when I started out, it was even before.
We need some time for somebody else to talk.
Excuse me, sorry. Please stay on mute when you're not. All right, go ahead, Mr. Sparks.
Yeah, I'm nearly done. I would just say, I
You're
was
fine.
going to
You're within your
say,
time.
yeah, you know, I remember the days of Lyndon Johnson as president, and you cautioned me not to would've, could've, should've, this president and that president. But I will assure you, in the arc of my life, all the presidents took documents advertently or inadvertently, no better and no worse than President Trump did. And I really don't care about motivation. But what I do care about is the strength and the strength and the ability of this Justice Department to go in the way they did after months of negotiation in good faith on both sides and take the quantity of documents they did. And it's not my concern, folks. It's the concern of a U.S. district judge that resulted in this order. And I urge you, folks, I urge you to read it. It is a well-reasoned decision, which, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. None of you do. But let's see what happens now that the Justice Department has appealed it. You know, when you appeal an order, the law says the facts of the opinion are writ as written, and that makes it very tough for the appellant. So we'll see what happens. Game's not over, but I will tell you that, you know, I think the President Trump
Last line,
is
go ahead.
acting no differently. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. All right, jazz hands for our brave first speaker. Thank you. It takes extra courage to go first, especially on a topic like this one. So thank you, Mr. Sparks.
Okay.
And we will now take questions for the speaker. But before we do, I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm keeping time for everybody. And so I know that it's important on a topic like this that people have equal time. So know that that's being taken care of. Alrighty, I see several questions. I'll probably just take a couple because I want to keep us moving. So let's start with Kathy Merrick. And remember, ask your question to me.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I would like to ask a question of Mr. Sparks of why it is that the Justice Department is suddenly so distrusted when they have been trusted throughout our history. And also this my second part of the question is Judge Cannon's decision has been disputed by many reputable lawyers as being rather irrelevant because the fact that the documents were taken, they were classified, they had not been declassified. How is it that her ruling is relevant for documents that are classified and are the property of the people and should be in the archives?
All right, go ahead. We need you to unmute, Mr. Sparks. You have 1 minute to answer. Still muted. Let's see if we can unmute
I'm
you.
sorry.
Oops. Oh no, I just muted you. Sorry. Trying to unmute you. Do it one more time.
There's a lot in there, ma'am. There's a lot in there. First
So,
of all,
because
I'm
it's
not
to me.
I'm not a historian, I'm a lawyer, but I will tell you that
You'll
in
tell.
my judgment, the Justice Department has not been respected throughout history. It's a mixed bag. That's all I can say. It's a mixed bag. I mean, remember the Nixon years? Were you around then?
Was she around?
I was. That's just one example. That's all I'm going to say. Now, also, it's a very subjective thing. With all respect to you, ma'am, I don't.
Sorry, I just need you to use the third person with all respect to her. And then go ahead and unmute. Mr. Sparks, go ahead and unmute. I had to mute you to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Go ahead and unmute.
It's very subjective to say that a lot of legal people dispute Judge Cannon. Look, I think the relevant thing is what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is going to say. I don't know how they are going to assess her opinion. What I would urge people on this call to do is read her short opinion. It's not a book. And judge for themselves. Since you care about the issue, you must care. You're on this call. And see for yourself the scholarship that is behind her opinion and make your own judgment. Don't listen to what other people tell you. Don't listen. Okay, that's all I'll say. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anybody else. Don't listen to the talking heads.
We're going to take one more question. And we will take it from Susan Rico. Go ahead and unmute. You have 30 seconds to ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep it quick. I wanted to ask the speaker if he has any experience with the handling of classified information, or have ever had a security clearance, which I have had over more than 3 decades in my work history up at all levels. And I deeply understand the grave nature of this. And in fact, at top secret, if that information got to our adversaries, it would cause exceptionally grave damage.
You might have a speech.
I'm sorry. I wanted to know if the speaker has ever handled classified information or understands the rules of such handling. Thank you.
Great. And seriously, think about speaking. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Sparks. You have 1 minute. You've got to unmute though. Sorry, I know that's tricky on your computer, I think. Still muted.
Now, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Go for it.
Okay. Look, I have been involved with litigation with the Justice Department, but not in cases involving documents subject to security clearance, nor do I have a security clearance.
Okay. With that, the speaker is thanked. One more round of jazz hands for good questions asked and good answers. Okay, so we will now go to a 4-minute, and actually another thing, just so that for anybody who's new, we always pre-plan the first few speeches and then it's open. So I'll indicate when that happens. But we will go ahead to our first docketed speech in the negative from David Newman. Mr. Newman, go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, I feel that the resolution of this debate to treat other presidents like Trump and they would all go to jail is absurd and deeply cynical. Our government is not the best democracy in the world, but it compares well with others, and they would not have been formed without the American example. Trump is unlike any ex-president of the United States we've ever had before, and no president should be above the law. He has an uncanny ability to bully his associates and demand loyalty exclusively to himself, which led many in the administration and even members of Congress to kowtow to his whims and violate their oath of office and their allegiance to the Constitution. The ethical bar he set was lower than any president in history. He was impeached twice, but the Republicans in the Senate twice failed to provide the 2/3 vote needed to convict him for high crimes and misdemeanors. The fact checkers in the press tallied more than 30,000 lies told by him in office, mostly in public, and yet no action was taken to remove him from office. And concerning the government-owned documents held illegally at Mar-a-Lago, the FBI search warrant was legally executed and issued by a judge, according to the laws of the United States, so that the check and balance that Mr. Sparks referred to was in effect here. The judge approved the subpoena. The FBI had to present significant evidence of criminal activity in order to obtain the warrant, the search warrant, and what they found is clear evidence of criminal behavior that compromises U.S. national security, most likely in violation of the Espionage Act. During the Trump administration, we heard from many high officials in his administration, in particular John Bolton and John Kelly, but there are numerous others, that his attitude toward classified information and treatment of classified documents was careless, that he liked to keep documents which should have been returned to their proper storage location when he was done with them. The documents recovered by the FBI included many marked secret, top secret, or even higher, and information on nuclear secrets. There are many empty secret folders, evidence of missing documents. Where are they? Who has them? Are they in foreign hands? Trump and his associates are not cooperating, and they are doing everything imaginable to delay the progress of this investigation. The basis for his second impeachment, done in January of 2021, is far worse than his careless handling of information, which could threaten the security of the United States if it fell into the wrong hands, and worse than anything done by any previous president, impeached or not. His planning, he planned before, during, and after the 2020 election to overturn the result of the election if he lost it. And that's a criminal conspiracy. And he topped off with his with his instigation of the first armed insurrection to invade the Capitol building since the War of 1812. The endless repeating of the big lie that the election was stolen by Trump and repeated by his followers and enablers, and the willingness of some followers to threaten public officials and even commit acts of violence, makes him and all MAGA-aiding Republicans in office an ongoing threat to our nation. Trump ruined the Republican Party, and our democracy is in the greatest danger since the Civil War. The voters must do their part and go to the polls to prevent MAGA enablers from taking office. Trump
10 more
must be
seconds.
tried and convicted at least one of his crimes, too many to number, or else declared insane and placed in a mental institution.
All right. Are there questions for the speaker? Let's start with John Tressiter. Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, there you go. Mhm.
Okay. Madam Chair, I wanted to ask the speaker about what about the Trump supporters saying that we should leave him alone. He's now a private citizen. This is getting out of hand.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Newman.
All right, well, yes, private citizens should not be harassed by the government without cause, but there is plenty of cause here, and the cause was brought before a judge, and the judge issued a warrant for the search.
All right. Thank you.
All righty. And let's go to Tracy Hollister. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question for the prior speaker, he cited fact checkers and very clearly was citing the mainstream news narrative. One thing I want to ask him is if he's aware of who funds fact checkers. And is he aware of any incident, as I am, where fact checkers are actually lying? For instance, they said that the only reason why somebody would not take the mRNA injection is due to misinformation, when plenty of people I know would not take it because there was no long-term safety studies, which is a fact. Is he aware that the mainstream media
Come
whose
to your question.
narrative,
Mhm.
the second question is he aware that the mainstream media whose narrative he is parroting have not reported on any of the at least 30,000 deaths that the US government through the CDC has cited, and most studies show is highly underrepresented. In other words, there's over at least 1 to 100 times, or some studies say 41 times the deaths. So I'm just wondering if the speaker is actually questioning the sources of information when we know that there's massive omissions from these sources.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Newman.
Well, I'm sure that the mainstream media make mistakes at times, that some fact checkers may not be doing their job properly, but in general, there's more than one source which will confirm what's going on. And in some cases, it's blatantly clear. I mean, I could tell myself, and lots of people I know could also tell, that what the president was saying was absolutely not true. It was false. And he did this over and over and over again. And so I believe their numbers. They also fact check every single president, and they all make mistakes. They all occasionally, even intentionally, tell a falsehood, but not at the rate at which Trump does. I think in many cases it's apparent that he's out of touch with reality. On the issue of vaccines, that really is kind of a separate issue, but just a comment that
5 seconds.
yes, there certainly were people who did not take the vaccine for a variety of reasons. I know of people who were warned by their doctor because of some immune condition or other condition, or their reaction to one of the shots,
I'm
that
going to
they
ask you to wrap up.
more. Mm-hmm.
All righty. With that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for our brave first negative. Thank you so much. And for good questions and good answers. Okay. And with that, we will move to our second affirmative. And for that, let's go to Joe Mueller. Joe, go ahead and unmute, and you have 4 minutes.
Okay, hey, good evening from Prosper, Texas, up in North Texas. Let me get my timer going here because I did a dry run on this, and I think I could keep it under 4 minutes.
I believe in you.
But I'm gonna,
I said I believe in you. Go ahead.
I'm gonna have to talk fast, and you're gonna have to listen fast. Okay, let me start my timer here. Okay, the way I approach this is I say, hey, let's follow the money. So what I did, I went on the internet and I looked at the value, the net worth of presidents when they entered office, when they left office. So give you a reference. President makes about $400,000 a year. He gets some perks, so maybe $500,000 a year. So if he's in the office, maybe about 8 years, he drags out $4 or $5 million if nothing else goes on. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to the first comment here. Barack Obama goes into office with $1.3 million. So you figure he picks up another 5 or 6, he ought to come out with about $7 million, something like that. No, you got to multiply that number by 10. Barack comes in with $1.3 million. He leaves with $70 million. Let's go to George W. Bush, the Bush Jr. Okay, he walks in with $20 million. He's worth that. He leaves office worth $40 million. So he picks up $20 million. which is really not bad for a guy that's noted for asking this infamous question: how much is a Brazilian? Okay. Clinton walks in. Now, poor old Clinton. They didn't do so good. Clinton walks in, $1.3 million. And then Hillary says when they left the White House, we're dead broke. That's it. However, post-presidency, Hillary is Secretary of State. We got the Clinton Foundation gets cranked up. And today, what do we have? We got cha-ching, $240 million the Clintons are worth. So that's a pretty good haul. The first Bush goes in with $4 million. This is Bush Senior. He comes out with $23 million, picks up about 20 million. Now, Ronald Reagan, the patron saint of Republicans like me. Okay, he's pretty clean. He comes in with 10 million. And like I said, if you do just everything by the book, you probably leave 5. He leaves with 15 million. So he was right on the money. He's a great guy. Now, for all the liberal leanings here, let's talk about that dirty old President Trump, that corrupt, no good son of a gun. So he walks in, he's worth $3 million. Okay. Also, he doesn't take any of the $400,000 salary. He donates that. So here we got $3 billion, and that scoundrel walked out with a whopping $2.3 million. So he went from $3 billion to $2.3 billion, which means he lost $700 million while he was president of the United States. Now, to talk to my good buddies on the red side, there's a number of issues with Mr. Biden. That the Bidens pulled about $30 million out of China. We know that there's a lot of issues around Hunter. We know there's a lot of issues around both the Biden brothers. Okay, so I'm going to do an overview, and then I'm going to wrap it up with the conclusion. Basically, what happens is, here's the way the club works. You got the old style Democrats, you got the Rhino Republicans. They hoot and holler, they make speeches, they say, okay, we're going to pass this legislation, vote for me. They go behind closed doors, they do all the pork belly, okay, I'll agree with this, you agree with that, and it all goes good. These guys pass legislation, they get to keep their nice cushy jobs, and then the taxpayers and the national debt increases. So what happens when Trump walks in? He doesn't need their money. He doesn't have to play that game. He can run the United States of America like it should be run. He comes in like a chief executive officer, puts in rational business models. And what happened early on before COVID? We had extremely low unemployment. We had extremely low inflation, very low interest rates. Homes and stocks were increasing. They're on the way up. Mm-hmm. I'm about to wrap up. Life is good. So the problem that the old rhinos have and the Democrats have, they can't control this guy. The average U.S. citizen loves him because things are going so good. So they have a problem. So all they can do is smear, or investigate. So conclusion, yes, I think that with all the millions of dollars flowing through all the Republicans and Democrat presidents that I talked about, there is very likely a lot of interesting, if you want to say, money flowing around. And I think, in fact, if you investigated them all, there would be a number of crimes. Probably a lot of them could justifiably be put in jail, but it will never happen because they're part of the Washington, D.C. club. So that's it. All right, I went 5 minutes. That wasn't too bad.
Little under.
Right.
So we're going to take we're going to go with questions here, and we will start with Joseph Stein. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the Speaker, what does the relative wealth of presidents leaving office have to do with the resolution that we're talking about tonight? Namely, the propriety of the search of records that ex-President Trump took from the White House and has at Mar-a-Lago. I don't see the connection. Maybe he can elaborate.
Okay.
I think somebody reread the topic to me. I thought I thought the subject or the, what do you call the proposal? What do we call this thing?
Resolution.
Anyway,
Yeah.
the what?
Resolution.
The resolution. I thought it said, if everyone, all the other presidents were investigated like Trump, they'd all be in jail. I don't know that this was only to talk about Mar-a-Lago. So my point is that there's a lot of money that the professional politicians pull in. And I think it's very doubtful that all of that is 100% clean money.
All right. And then let's go to Andrew Hume. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I wonder if the speaker could address the issue of, even if we focus on the increase in revenue, if you like, of the individual presidents, most of their decisions have indirect benefits. For example, lowering taxes for very rich people has an enormous benefit for a very few people. And those people would gladly pay, and probably have, through contributions to PACs, to causes that Trump would espouse. Could the speaker address that issue?
Okay. Go ahead.
So legislation dictates their, I'm a little fuzzy on the question, and I couldn't hear you when you first started. Can you go at it one more time if you don't mind?
Go ahead, restate.
Sure. A lot of the effect that the president can have is in what legislation gets pushed through. And in particular, Trump pushed through tax cuts for mainly the very rich people. Those benefits greatly outweighed probably any increase in his personal income. Could you address that issue?
Could he address it?
Oh yeah, that's no problem at all. So I mean, what difference does it make? He left office $700 million less wealthy than he went into office. So Trump is not in it for the money at all. He's got an ego, he's got power, he wants to be a command general, but money is not Trump's driving factor.
All righty, sounds good. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for our second affirmative. Thanks so much. And by the way, I know that several other folks had their hands up for questions, and I would encourage you to chat to your whip if it can be a speech, and also keep raising your hand. We have a lot more interest in questions than we can sort of squeeze in right this minute. So, but don't give up. We'll do our best to get to as many people as possible. And then I also just wanted to mention that the way that our debate style works, people can work with the resolution as they see it. And so it can be broad. And with that, I would like to call on our second speech in the negative. And for that, we'll go to Harry Boyd. Mr. Boyd, go ahead and unmute. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to tell a story and then draw a point. My story was, as a young man, I worked for Martin Luther King's organization in the Civil Rights Movement. I knew the terrible evil of segregation, but from first-hand experience, I'd grown up in Atlanta. I'd seen people brutalized, including my father, who was an outspoken critic. So I was a very righteous and angry young man. And I attended to sweeping statements. And well, the thing that the Civil Rights Movement taught me, and this was a lesson not from politicians, but from sharecroppers and teachers and business people, was that the people are the heart of democracy. So I knew that. But in 1964, in the election between Lyndon Johnson and Goldwater, the first time I could vote is I was talking to an elderly man who said, and I told him, neither Lyndon Johnson or Goldwater is going to integrate the South. And he said, Harry, that's ridiculous. The movement is going to integrate the South. The question is, who is best to be in office for our work, not for what they're going to do? And he went through the different ways that Lyndon Johnson would be more supportive in terms of federal marshals and court decisions and media coverage. And that stayed with me. So the question is not whether politicians can solve our problems or whether they're all corrupt, but who is best in office for the work of the people and making a better society. And I must say, just as a footnote, when Trump lost me immediately when he said, "I alone can fix America's problems." That was a subversion of the We the People foundation of the American promise.
All right. And with that, are there questions for the speaker? I'm going to take one, and then I'll come to you, Joe. I see you. But at first, nobody raised their hand, so I got a chance to jump in. And I get to say the word "you" because I'm the chair. So Harry, I'm curious, with regard to the issues that are being raised tonight around whether our former president did something genuinely criminal, whether DC insiders are attacking him because they can, all of that, frankly, it makes me feel kind of powerless as a citizen. And I'm curious how do we act when we're facing this kind of big national systemic kind of problem?
Oh, it's a good question, Madam Chair. So George Packer, in his new article in the October Atlantic, the front cover issue, talks about what Ukraine has learned that we've forgotten. And he argues that the tremendous spirit and energy and passion and civic generosity of Ukrainians has to do with that they learned a message, or they learned a lesson, that their foundation of a society was self-organization of the people. So I think the real question is, how can people get together across different partisan lines and think about what we can do to solve our problems, and who can be best in office, not who's going to be perfect or good or righteous, but who can be potential allies, or who can be the best people we work with. I think there's a tremendous hunger for that. I think that's what we need. I hope Braver Angels moves in that direction.
Thank you. All right, additional questions. Mr. Mueller, go ahead and unmute, ask your
Can you
question.
hear me? Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Boyd. He made a comment about Trump's comment that he concerned that Trump says, "I can fix it," egotistical, not a good thing to do. I wonder how much that affects the US as much as 500 Black Lives Matter riots back in the year 2000 that created massive chaos. And I think everybody knows now that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization, definitely not on our side. So how would you compare the negative effect of Trump's statement versus 500 Black Lives Matter riots?
Okay.
Well, I didn't agree with Black Lives Matter's approach. It's what, in the movement, there were two different approaches. And what is known as what's called the mobilizing approach, which is protest, going after the enemy, polarizing. But the approach I learned in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was grassroots organizing, that's different than mobilizing. So organizing is developing relationships across our differences, people who make us uncomfortable, developing capacities to work on real problems in real communities. And I think we've seen much too little of that now. We need to bring back a local community capacity building approach so we learn to work together across our differences.
All right, and for a final question, Sue Ellen Ellerby, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Yes, I find the dialogue here to be a little bit disconnected. And it concerns me because I thought the point of this was to talk about the Mar-a-Lago issue.
So your question.
So my question is, can we get back to the fact that there was classified information and top classified information in a country club in Florida?
All right, so Mr. Boyd, if you would bring your remarks to that.
Well, I think it's, I don't I don't think that's disconnected with what I was saying. When Trump said that he thought he alone could fix it, it was repeated by his constant statement that these documents are mine, the court is mine, the military is mine. It showed a view of his own role as kind of like a king. That's not what we need. We need, but it's not, we don't need liberals who are going to say they're going to fix everything either. We need to, and that's from Mar-a-Lago and everything else. We need to revive the notion that we, the people, are the foundational agents of democracy.
All right. With that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands for our second neg. Yes, very good. And I just, I would say I've really enjoyed all of the speeches thus far. And I also have been seeing just some comments. I think that if speakers could be sure to, I am totally convinced that each speaker who has spoken is responding to the resolution. But if we can, I think it would help folks if we can try to draw those links really explicitly, not because they're not there, but just I think because I get the impression a little bit more directness on that subject might be helpful.
Right, taken.
Yeah. And so with that, I am looking for a speech in the affirmative. And just so you all know, we have now moved beyond the pre-planned speeches. We'll go to 3 minutes per speech, and we are going to go to Paul Norris. You are the next affirmative. Mr. Norris, go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to be quite honest. I don't really know the truth of this whole thing, and I have very mixed feelings about it. I suspect it's likely that both sides are partly right. I think it's pretty clear there is a deep state, depending on how you go about defining that, but it seems very clear to me. And it also seems very clear to me that there are significant problems with Trump. So both sides, I think, are partly right. One of the things that's tough about this, I'm a history buff, and we only find out the truth of a lot of things 50, 60 years after they happen. This, you don't find out in the moment, and it's not possible to find out. And we've learned a lot of real crap about what has happened in the past in our prior presidents. JFK apparently sleeping with an East German spy. And J. Edgar Hoover holding that over his head so Hoover couldn't be fired. Presidents have always gotten special treatment. Who knew that Franklin Delano Roosevelt couldn't walk without braces because that was all covered up? People didn't see that. So the presidents, they've always gotten special treatment. And so I do think, in fact, our resolution as stated is probably largely correct. Also, people, there's nothing sacrosanct about classified documents. Documents are often classified just to cover up embarrassment. So that all by itself, doesn't prove a whole lot. It depends on what they really were. And then there's just the whole out of control nature of our criminal justice system. There's a saying that a good prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich for murder. And that's really true. When there is only a one-sided presentation, you could pretty much convince people of anything. Prosecutors have way too much power. One of the things that has really changed in the criminal justice system in the last 20 years is how much power has fallen into the hands of prosecutors and been taken away from others. Immunity actually allows prosecutors to deliberately prosecute somebody they know to be innocent, and there is no recourse unless the institution that employs them does something about it. If you don't believe me about this, start listening to Bound by Oath, a great podcast series from the Institute for Justice. And, is the deep state proven? People talk about how Trump, the Secret Service would not take Trump to the Capitol and how great that was, that the Secret Service were doing their job. Well, think about that. They supposedly report to Trump. So who is giving them the orders that say that they don't take him to the Capitol? If that doesn't show there's some kind of a deep state, I don't know what does. And my final point is quite simply this. Government develops its own interests separate from the interests of the people. This is something that was understood at the founding of our country. It was not understood in the Russian Revolution. It was not understood by the French Revolution. It was understood by the United States. Government develops its own interests separate from the interests of the people. And Trump is the only recent president to directly address this issue. And with that, I would just like to close.
Great. Let's go to Mr. Falk. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The speaker alluded to a variety of things, one of which has raised a question for me for a long time. I've read many reports that the president, when he is seated in office, has the ultimate authority to declassify anything he wants. Perhaps one of the questions would be, does anyone believe that's not true? The second thing is, many of the things that are classified top secret, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, include things like the driving path of the motorcade of 3 weeks ago. And while it's top secret, while the motorcade is in motion, the next day, it's useless. And a lot of those do not get reclassified away from top secret, but who cares? So
your
the
question.
speaker could address those kinds of things. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for enhancing my points.
All right. And let's go to Tom Daly. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the previous speaker if he can cite any other cases where an ex-president has taken top secret documents and then refused to give them up.
All right.
And my question would be, does the questioner know for certain that there have not been other presidents who took top secret documents and nobody ever asked that they be returned?
All right.
So once again, this can be a case of special treatment for ex-President Trump.
All right. With that, the speaker's thanked.
Exactly.
Jazz hands. Yep. Okay. So I just want to take a second and remind folks. So I'm gonna keep moving in just a second, but I just want to take a second to remind folks that this is tough, guys, and this is frustrating. And I think that most people in this room are probably like, about something somebody has said at this point. And I just want to compliment the group on sticking with it because, again, the whole point here is that we're trying to have a better conversation about the same things that the country is, as usual, sort of tearing itself apart about, and where people develop these little social media bubbles and don't actually engage with one another. So if you're finding it frustrating, that's okay. That is actually part of this. Remember that you can always take a break, take some deep breaths. We'd love it if you gave a speech or asked a question. And the other thing I sometimes find is that if you just wait a few minutes, somebody else will say the thing you feel really needs to be said. So I just want to acknowledge that this is challenging. So, okay, with that, we are going to move to a speech in the negative from I'm not sure I'm going to get your name right, but Dan Scavizzi. Go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I usually say Scavizzi, but
great.
Historically Italian, I guess it's Scavezzi. So either is good. I think it's a relatively simple issue for me when I thought about the proposition here was that if all former presidents were treated like Trump, they'd all be in jail. I am negative on that because I think they are all treated like him in the sense that if they commit crimes, they'll get investigated and prosecuted. And the former presidents that I know have not committed these serious crimes like Donald Trump has, including the one we're talking about tonight, which is the possessing of the government documents, including the classified information, but just the documents themselves. I have a little bit more to say on that. And then the last point of the initial argument, they're treated like him. They didn't commit crimes and they're not in jail. That's sort of the evidence. So to me, it's fairly simple. A couple of people have said, oh, they must have all committed crimes, but we have no evidence for that. So why even talk about that other than just kind of cynicism and that, oh, everybody must be committing crimes left and right. I think it's highly unlikely that the presidents that have their wonderful little libraries and can talk about the things that they've done also wanted to take out confidential documents. It's really not necessary for them to do that, to write their books and make money. The personal perspective I have on this is I went from private industry to government job. And when I first got there, all the talk about documents and public disclosure of documents and protecting documents, I had a security clearance at one point. But the whole idea that these documents are not yours, they're the people's document. That's a little hard to wrap your mind around at first. You know, I wrote them. This is my document. I should be able to destroy it. I should be able to take it wherever I want. Well, that's not true. It's part of the job of being a government employee that you sign up. Those documents are not yours. They're public records. They may or may not be classified, and you have to treat them according to the law. So Donald Trump doesn't have respect for that law. He thinks that all of those documents are just his to do with whatever he likes, but that's not the law, and that's why he should be prosecuted, and that's why he's different than the other presidents. And that's it. That's my speech.
All righty, great. Questions for the speaker? Let's go to Bernie Friend. Obviously, I love your last name. Go for it. Unmute, ask your question to me.
Okay, hello? Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah. I don't know if it's so much a question rather than a statement on a lot of this.
And this is
Just
only, all we're doing right now is questions. If you can make a question, I'll let you
okay.
do it.
Well, okay, here's a question. Madam Chairman, what else would you expect from someone whose brand is being a crook? This is his brand. It's been his brand since he's been 6.
So what else would the speaker expect? Yeah, go ahead.
No, this is it. This is perfectly normal. It's like going to a Rolls-Royce dealership and expecting a fantastic car. You expect this from Trump. Everyone that came before him, you don't expect this because it's not their brand. They may have this in their heart, but if it comes out, they get penalized. Look at Nixon, et cetera, But with Trump, his base applauds it. Wonderful, wonderful that you're again up to no good. That's wonderful. That's what all I was saying.
All right. So Mr.
No jazz hands? No. All right. Okay.
Mr. Scavezzi, if you would respond to the idea that this is on brand for President.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with that. It does seem consistent in that he often, would ignore the will of the people. He's not a good employee. He's a good boss, right? Or he thinks he is anyway, in terms of The Apprentice. But when you're president, you actually do have a boss, and that's the American people. So it's not his right to just take documents anywhere. And like the questioner said, it's not inconsistent. However, it's illegal. It is the smoking gun that some people look for. He had the classified documents. He shouldn't have had them, and that's the crime.
All right, and we'll take one more question from Jane Fox. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me. You're still muted. All right, go ahead and, take your time.
Okay, yeah.
Here we go.
So I was wondering if there's a law that protects a former president from a criminal investigation. And that's just my ignorance of the law and how that works with presidents.
Fine thing to ask. All right, go ahead, Mr. Scavezzi.
Yeah, I've wondered about this when he was the president. And as far as I could tell, there's only a Justice Department memo that says you shouldn't prosecute a sitting president. As far as I know, there's no law that says you can't prosecute a person who is not president anymore. I think that's particularly applicable in this case. If he ever had, a reason to be having those documents, it was when he was president. As a former president, he has no reason. So it's kind of like stolen property. And they got a search warrant, and guess what? They found the stolen property.
All right, with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands, thank you. Good. Okay, so I'm now looking for a speech in the affirmative, and we will go to Rick Stagenborg. Go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Boy, my head's been all over the place listening to all this stuff on both sides, and it's really good stuff. Of course, I don't agree with everything, but I do want to bring up something that's a little different than most people have brought up. For one thing, I didn't look at the question in terms of just what's going on with the papers at Mar-a-Lago. I look at it in terms of the whole pattern of the way that Trump's been attacked during his presidency, even before he took office. I didn't vote for him. I'm not a fan, not at all a fan of him personally, or in a lot of ways, the way he conducted himself in office and the decisions he made as a president. However, I was a big fan of some of the things that he said and some of the things I think he really wanted to do, especially in terms of normalizing relations with Russia, ending NATO, getting us out of Syria. I mean, those are great ideas. And of course, that's what he got hammered for the worst. The only time the New York Times ever said he was presidential was when he bombed Syria over a false flag, in my opinion. So it seems to me that the reason that he was gone after, even before he took over the presidency, after he'd been elected, was because he was promising to normalize relations with Russia. And geopolitically speaking, I think Russia was our next obvious target after the Mideast. I mean, we sponsored a coup in 2014, and we were working to train the Ukrainian army. We were building up NATO all around Russia's borders, and putting nuclear capable weapons in some of those countries on their border. To me, it seemed really obvious why they would want to stop a president who was talking about normalizing relations with Russia. We've done nothing but demonize Russia pretty much throughout history, but especially since Putin came into office. So I think that was probably the motivation, and they've just gone after him with everything they can, and they're still doing it now. And by they, I do mean the deep state, not just the Democratic Party. They're just part of the system. But I guess I might have misspoke when I said that I think any president would be convicted if they were investigated the way that he was, because it's possible that some of them wouldn't have found any crimes. But I tend to be a little bit cynical knowing what I do know about the way things work. However, a lot of them would have been. I mean, I think that any of them, there would be a good case for convicting them of war crimes for the way that we've conducted our foreign policy. And by the way, I want to say I was really glad to hear that the introductory song was an anti-war song. I thought, wow, maybe I'm not the only one coming here with this opinion. But anyway, pardon, am I at 3 minutes?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. Okay, questions for the speaker. Let's go to Ronnie Begleiter. You've been patient. Go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
There. What I wanted to ask the previous speaker is, and I enjoyed a lot of what he said, I do think Trump got some abuse for wanting to have a different kind of relationship with Russia. In light of what Putin has done, bombing the Ukraine, bombing hospitals, announcing that maybe he'll get food to the people in Somalia. On the other hand, maybe he won't. Maybe people who didn't want to have a good relationship with Russia were actually correct. So my question is, what does the speaker think of try to have good relations with Russia, knowing now what Russia is doing? The other thing I want to say just real briefly is that it's always
has to be a question.
Okay, here's the question. It is said that when Post-it notes were created, they became the property of 3M, not the property of the genius who created them, because he created them as part of his job. Isn't that exactly the same as what Trump did with the documents? He created them as part of his job, and like the poor guy who invested Post-it notes, shouldn't he have to turn them over?
All right. Go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Sagamore.
I'm glad the questioner changed the question because that's a much easier one to answer. To my knowledge, the president did not create all of the documents that he allegedly took. We haven't been told what's in the documents. But even if he created them, he may have had as far as I know, he does have the right to declassify anything he wants. And I wish more presidents would declassify more things instead of declassifying things selectively for political gain. But I guess the short answer is, as far as I know, that's really not the case.
All right, and
correct.
So for one more question, we'll go to Frankie Hires. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Chair, as a Jeffersonian Republican, I'd like to ask, what would the impact be of the accumulation of these classified documents? In other words, wouldn't Trump be more vulnerable to commit these accumulative crimes? And wouldn't every president going back historically then be proportionally less vulnerable to commit this crime and therefore be subjected to the same outcomes? In other words, we've allowed for an accumulation of statutes and we've allowed for a centralization of power such that we end up in a situation where every president's going to be more vulnerable to the crime because there's more crimes and they're facing seeing more documents and more, they're just going to be subject to more ways to commit those crimes as time prevails and we don't redress the fundamental principles of the lack of faith in a judiciary to begin with.
Your question?
What is the impact of the accumulation statutes? Wouldn't Trump be proportionally more vulnerable?
Great.
Okay, if I understand the questioner's question, I guess there's more ways to go at him if that's the case, and I'm assuming it probably is true that they've created more ways to go at him. So that's just my educated guess, but I'll tell you one thing. If they use the Espionage Act against him, we're in serious trouble because the Espionage Act should have been declared unconstitutional long before they used it against Julian Assange. I mean, it's an abomination.
All right, and with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands once again. All right, so we're now going to a speech in the negative, which will come from Andrew Hume. Go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you. I think I'd like to address a couple of things that have come up during these various talks. The issue about whether or not these documents are declassified is actually irrelevant. The 3 charges that Trump was that were quoted in the subpoena related to the Espionage Act, which predates classification of documents. So obviously that's not relevant. The others are basically hindering investigations and things of that nature. So whether or not these documents were classified or not is utterly irrelevant to this. It is important, though, in assessing the damage that has been done by those documents having been collected. I would also point out that there were many attempts made in trying to get these documents back before any fuss was made, before anyone knew anything about this. And in fact, Trump was the one who basically made this public knowledge. The Justice Department had not intended to make this a public affair. It was Trump's doing. Back to the topic at hand, to the resolution. I think it's fairly clear that all presidents may have done stuff that is distasteful or marginally illegal of some sort, but the rule of thumb in American politics is we don't go after the little stuff. We did go after Nixon, and if Nixon hadn't been pardoned, he would have been indicted and convicted because he did really illegal stuff. We haven't had any other presidents do that blatantly illegal stuff. So I think in terms of the resolution, no, the other presidents would not have been indicted and convicted. I think it's a rare president who does blatantly illegal stuff. And in fact, I can really only think of two, and Nixon and Trump are the ones. So that's it.
All right. Very good. Questions for the speaker. Let's go to Mark Seri. Carrie, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. What you're saying, that no other presidents, pardon me?
What he's saying.
Yeah, what the prior speaker said, because of all the spying that was done on Trump. I mean, yes, Nixon spied, invaded the offices of Democratic operatives, but I think every bit as much was done to Trump before he was elected and throughout his administration, in fact. And there's plenty to back that up if people are curious about it. There are a lot of people that have written about it. Molly Hemingway. Pardon me?
I just want to hear your question when you're ready.
Oh, yeah. So my question is, yeah, I guess I don't have my question is why, why you're singling out Trump, but there's other presidents that have done things also, but they didn't have the deep state. They have the deep state behind them, basically, and so they're not going to be bothered. They're not going to be prosecuted.
Okay.
So I think it's very selective. This whole thing is very selective.
Okay. So, Mr. Hume, what do you think about that idea?
The issue of whether or not Trump was spied upon or not, I think, is open to dispute. It's not clear to me that he was, but it's certainly not as clear as repeated attempts to get back documents which Trump knowingly denied having, despite the fact that he had them. So I think there's just a difference there.
All right. And for another question, we'll go to Laura Bradshaw. Go ahead and unmute. Ask your question to me.
Hi, Madam Speaker. Thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering if the previous speaker, or maybe somebody who has experience with having secret clearance or handling classified documents, can tell us whether there are different statutes. I'm under the impression that there might be different statutes under which a president can automatically or quickly declassify things on the way out or afterwards, which is henceforth the case in our situation here. Is there a different statute under which classified documents can be, top secret classified documents can be declassified than a lower level of documents? I'm very concerned about the our spies, who are probably pretty scared right about now.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Hume. What do you know about that?
So all I can say is hearsay evidence from listening to people talk about this. the president's ability to declassify a document ends when he or she is no longer president. So anything post hoc is neither here nor there. There was a claim made at one point that Trump had a rule that anything he took out of the office was declassified. No one except a lawyer who posted that comment had ever heard of this. All the senior staff that has been interviewed said they'd never heard of anything like this. And in general, there is a process to declassifying something. You know, you have to go do paperwork and stuff. The paperwork was never done.
All right, with that, the speaker's thanked. Jazz hands, yes. Yes, good. Okay. So once again, I know there are more questions than we're having time for. If there is time at the end, I'll expand the number of questions a little bit. But excuse me, for now, we will move on to a speech in the affirmative from Sue Rice. Go ahead and unmute, Ms. Rice, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think that presidents in the past would have gone to jail, nor do I think President Trump is going to go to jail. I believe that our government is using the Mar-a-Lago raid as an opportunity to try and discredit our former president and reduce people's willingness to vote for the midterm candidates whom he supports, and also to try and keep him off the ticket in 2024. My reasons for feeling the way I do, the suppression of information surrounding the raid so far. What were they looking for? Why did they so totally redact the affidavit? Why did they take what they took? And what are the things that they took? Some of this information, I think, is vital for people who are trying to understand what happened with this raid and compare it to what has happened in the past. I think that we have repeatedly seen weaponizing of the DOJ and the FBI against the former president. And I also have to wonder why we're not considering the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable search and seizure. Why doesn't the Constitution apply? I don't know how many of you watched James Comey during the time that Hillary Clinton was on the hot seat for scrubbing things from her server, but I listened to him read a lengthy list of indictable offenses. And when he concluded that, he said, but there will be no indictment. She had several dozen emails on her server that contained top secret information. And in fact, they were on a level that was higher than top secret and were marked with a special access code. Now, if you didn't think that what Hillary Clinton did violated the law, you can still see how what has happened now is setting a precedent for what will happen in the future. I don't see this as a good thing. So far, we've been told they took medical records, they took documents that violated attorney-client privilege. It appears they took a host of items that were not privy to information. Why would they even take some of these things? I think that this whole raid action undermines citizen confidence in the 3-letter agencies like the DOJ and the FBI. I think it also undermines confidence in our judiciary system, as well as it reduces our trust in the current president, who said his #1 priority was to unite this nation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, questions for the speaker. Let's start with Mary Leopold. Go ahead, ask your question to me. Oh, but you're still muted.
I know, I'm mute. Okay, so hi, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to know if the speaker, I just really want to understand, does she think it's okay for a president to take classified documents out of the office?
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think that we don't know what he took, whether the items that he took are ones that he was entitled to. And we don't know if his actions are any different or if he deviated from the procedures that other presidents have held to. We don't have any way of knowing that.
All right. And then let's go to Nita Landis. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker why she thinks our former president did not return the records that were requested from him.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure that he didn't return. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. I'm not sure that he had in his possession documents that he had been requested to return. The information regarding this raid has been suppressed, and we really don't know what they were looking for, why they wanted it, what they took, what had gone on beforehand. We really don't know those answers at this time.
All right. With that, the speaker's thanked. Jazz hands. Yep. All righty. So I'm now looking for a speech in the negative, and we will go to Andrew City, or City. Go ahead and unmute, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Actually, I just want to start off. It's kind of funny. I was joking with my fiance earlier when I told her the topic of conversation that when all is said and done, we're actually only talking about four individuals. So when we say if all former American presidents were treated as Trump is, they would go to jail. We're talking about 4 people. But I think it's a valid concern, but doesn't negate the underlying truth that all American citizens are bound by the Constitution, bound by federal law, bound by state law, and we're all entitled to due process. So far, there's been no, at least public evidence that Trump's due process has been violated. The Department of Justice went to a federal judge and requested a search warrant based on an affidavit they presented with what they said with probable cause. The search warrant was granted. That's what gave them the right to go into Mar-a-Lago and retrieve the documents. Now, whether the search was, people have been making the contention that it's politically motivated. Whether or not that's true, in some ways, is irrelevant. A crime is still a crime, whether the person prosecuting the crime has alternative motivations for pursuing the case. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and I would hope that most people would agree, is it shouldn't matter whether it's Donald Trump or Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or George W. Bush or Barack Obama. If in any of those cases, if the National Archives had reached out to the Department of Justice and said, we believe that they are still holding on to potentially classified documents from their time in office, we need you to follow up, then the proper thing is to follow up. And regardless, Democrat, Republican, if they break the law, they should be held accountable. They should enjoy the same level of due process as any American, but they should still be held accountable. I understand a lot of the knee-jerk resistance, and I think that there's room for debate about whether or not Donald Trump has been treated more harshly than, say, previous presidents. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the treatment has been wrong or inappropriate. If we need to do a better job of holding our leaders accountable, there's absolutely no reason not to start with Trump. If this is the place we start, then this is the place we start. But the president of the United States, especially after they leave office, is a citizen of the United States. They are bound by the same laws, and we should live up to our principles. We should say everyone is bound by the law.
All right. Questions for the speaker? We'll start with Steve Bjornstad. Been very patient. Go ahead and unmute, ask your question to me.
Yes, you hear me, I assume?
Yes, sir.
And I just want to put in a plug real quick. This is the second
question, right?
this is for you.
Question?
Yeah, the question is coming very quickly.
Oh, good.
But
Okay.
I want to let everybody know that you and the three ladies that you did the abortion debate with blew me away.
Well,
You
thank you.
guys were just amazing. So thank you. I'd like to ask the Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the speaker about due process. And because in today's world of social media and instant information, it is very, very easy to make your case by leaks and then create a dialogue, a scenario based on the court of public opinion. And so I'd like to ask your speaker, Andrew, if he really does think that due process is being followed when there is so much leaking going on and so much information, quasi-information, that's out there, and that we are then expected to have an opinion and to, vote.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Seedy.
I'm not sure what you mean by leaking. I can tell you from what I've read, and it is my understanding that this started back in May of 2021 when the National Archives combed through the documents that they retrieved from the Trump administration and believed that there were some that were missing. And that started a process leading eventually over a year later to the Department of Justice sending a group of FBI agents to Mar-a-Lago to retrieve documents that they believe were still missing. So far as I know, the affidavit that the federal judge used to grant the search warrant was released, redacted to try to protect identities, but with the information that they used to grant the search warrant. So none of that would qualify, so far as I know, as leaking or an illegal disclosure of information.
All right. For a final question, we'll go to Deb Stroob. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, Madam Speaker. My question to you is actually for the speaker before Andrew, and that was she was alluding to the Justice Department being
only get
unfair.
answers to this questions to this speaker, but he can address it if you want.
I can address.
You can ask the question and Mr. Seedy can respond if you would like.
Oh, okay. So my question to the speaker is, does he feel there actually has been unfair practice by the Justice Department in view of the fact that the Justice Department was run by Bill Barr, an appointee of Trump for the last 4 years while he was in office? And Bill Barr has come out and said that Trump has been absolutely wrong to take the documents and not return them to the archives.
All right, Mr. Seedy.
I mean, if you're asking for my personal opinion, I don't put much weight on Bill Barr for a number of reasons. So I haven't really factored his opinion into my perspective. I don't think that Trump has been treated unfairly. Maybe unusually. Is it possible that he's drawn more attention? That there's an argument to be made there, but I think it's irrelevant. If there's a probable cause that he committed a crime and a judge issues a search warrant, the search is legal, and any evidence that was found is admissible in court. And that's basic due process for any American, whether it's me or Donald Trump.
All right, with that, the speaker's thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay, so I think we have time for just another couple speeches, assuming they're quick. And so we're going to go to John Selby for a speech in the affirmative. And if you can do it in 2 minutes, that'd be great, although I won't hold you to that super strictly. Mr. Selby, good. Okay, go ahead.
Hello. So my point here is if we were truly interested in upholding the law, the rule of law, democracy, we probably wouldn't have Mar-a-Lago right now. Okay, and it's been said that democracy only works as well as the mean sanity level of a society. Slice out a group of rational and reasonable and unselfish people with the capacity to prevent tensions from blowing up, then offset them with an equal number of people who have problems with questions such as what state is Utah in, or go DEFCON 4 when another driver asserts that they have the right of way. What remains is the rest of us, the underrepresented, the underappreciated, perform basic functions like going to the ballot box to determine who is going to leave our country. Our ability to make rational, informed decisions is bent, folded, and mutilated by WMD, which I refer to as weapons of mass division. Payloads of misinformation and misinformation are dropped on us every hour. True lies, yet factually correct, yet intellectually dishonest reporting where facts are taken out of context, exaggerated, and exculpatory items are surgically removed. Rigid partisanship leads to inflexibility to the degree where we no longer seek truth, or worse, we don't want to hear the truth. When the other side is viewed as an invasive species, decorum and process are kicked to the curb. Operating with the myriad of carefully crafted information that supports one side is not a formula for a sane society or a functioning democracy. Politicians never stop campaigning. When the goal is to annihilate everything and everyone connected to the other side, the messages are less than unified. WMDs combined with the rigid partisanship create a continuous loop of societal destruction. When WMDs, that's weapons of mass division, feed partisans information that confirms their position, they become more rigid. When partisans become more rigid, the WMDs are emboldened, and the search for truth is a casualty. As our braver angels colleagues have demonstrated, give someone a space to be a little less rigid, and they are more open to respecting other points of view. So why are we not the least bit curious when credible information is discovered that could hurt our side? Why do we go into the damage control mode instead of seeking the truth? Because the stakes are high and the penalties are severe. Protecting the party is more important than protecting the will of the people. Until we're willing to call out our own, this cycle will continue until we fix it, or democracy will go to free fall, whichever comes first. Investigating a laptop was put on hold because information could have been devastating.
Last line.
Okay. And so without due process, we didn't look into things that would affect the outcome of the election because we were partisan. And if those things would have been looked into and people would have given a chance to vote based on the information that was presented to them, Donald Trump would have won this election. We would not have had a January 6th, and we would not have had a Mar-a-Lago.
All righty. With that, we're going to take one question just because we're short on time. And that'll come from Rita Chisholm. Go ahead and unmute Ms. Chisholm and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker, and it's broad, and it's actually intended to make all of us think. Something that I've run upon, and it's very bothersome to me, is what I call intellectual dishonesty. And that happens on both sides. So I would just like for the speaker, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that, because when I see certain people that what I consider to be feigning surprise, or, there's just so much intellectual dishonesty that I personally sense, and I just wanted to know if anyone else senses that. Thank you.
Mr. Selby, go ahead.
Yes, well, I speak to that point specifically, and that's absolutely true. So, on top of all that, we have mixed motives. So, our intent is not always known. if your kids are screaming for ice cream and you stop to get them for them, is it because you love them, you want them to be quiet, or you want ice cream yourself? It's really a pretty simple example, but things can get very complicated, Trojan horses, and find their way into conversations and into policy when motives are not really brought out and discovered.
Alrighty, with that, the speaker is thanked. Jazz hands, yes.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll take one more speech just because I'm trying to be careful about both being even on F and neg. So the last speech of the evening will go to Ingrid Wysong. Go ahead and Wysong. Okay.
Thank you.
Up to 3 minutes. Go for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So although I basically disagree with the resolution, the main point I would like to make is that I hope we all refrain from making complete conclusions now until the DOJ investigation in this matter is complete. The resolution talks about other presidents that may have done criminal things, but as others, previous speaker referred to, we're not talking about or looking at specific evidence from them of criminal activity. So I don't find that compelling. In the present situation, there is some clear evidence indicating likely criminal activity in the classified documents that were kept and mishandled. And of course, if the former president had declassified them, there has been ample opportunity in the past 3 weeks for his representation to present that evidence of declassification to the DOJ or to Judge Connor. No evidence of that has been produced. However, I would like to urge all parties to refrain from jumping to conclusions. For the blue-leaning folks, I hope that they remember that the investigation is not complete. We've not yet seen the whole story, all the evidence, what's going on with the former president, would he be indicted for any crime? So let's not assume that. For the red-leaning folks, please bear in mind, this is not a raid, it's a search. It was done according to the Constitution legal warrant process. And certainly we know that some documents have been mishandled because we see the documents. But of course, the investigation is not complete. We don't know the whole story. And therefore, I urge to refrain, don't rashly accuse the FBI and the DOJ of misconduct at this point based on that. Thank you very much.
All right, and we'll take one question from Rosemary Ford. Actually, if you're still there, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Yeah, when I put on my picture, it shut off the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
So
great.
I'm doing something wrong. But anyway, my question is to the speaker and also to Madam Speaker, and to some of the other people who have spoken. Is anybody really concerned about the fact that here you had a president well known to be careless or with documents of all kinds of security basis, and someone is in charge of seeing that these documents are in the proper place at the proper time, which would have been when President Biden was sworn in. And it really concerns me that now we're being told that there may be terrible ramifications from the carelessness of the way these documents were kept at Mar-a-Lago. But it doesn't appear to me that there was any rush to get these documents in hand at the time of the change of administration. I understand there was confusion and all the rest, but that whole issue seems to have been lost.
Question?
And I'm just wondering if anyone but the prior speaker included has any comment on that.
Okay.
Certainly, I think we should all be concerned about possible grave harm to U.S. security and to U.S. intelligence assets through mishandling of this kind of information. So I hope we all bear that in mind. And as I understand it, within just a few months of the change of administrations, there were questions by the archives and negotiation and attempts to visit the Mar-a-Lago and so on. So I think It has been an ongoing attempt all this time to make sure the documents are retrieved. Thank you.
All righty. So with that, we ran just a little bit over, but I wanted to let as many people speak as possible. We're going to do the formal parliamentary procedure way of closing, and then we're going to do a quick debrief, so don't go anywhere. But formally, I'd like someone to unmute and say, I move we adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you. And then if someone else would unmute and say second.
I second.
All right, with that, we are adjourned.